It began the day she realized kindness could be used as a weapon. That thought stayed with her, sharp, metallic, impossible to shake. Lena had always seen herself as one of the good ones. She listened when others spoke. She smiled through tension. She apologized first, even when she wasn't wrong. But that morning, as sunlight spilled across her small kitchen, she felt something different rise inside her. Something heavy, warm, and wrong. It started with a message. 3 words on her phone. "You disappointed me." From her boss, short and cold. She had spent 3 months perfecting that project, staying late, skipping dinner, sacrificing weekends. And now those 3 words sat like a needle under her skin. Disappointed. The word felt cruel in its restraint. It didn't scream. It judged. It dismissed every late night, every ounce of care she'd poured into her work. For the first time, Lena didn't cry. She didn't defend herself or replay what she could have done better. She just stopped caring. And that's when she noticed it. A pulse in her chest, slow and dark, like anger trying to breathe. But it wasn't anger. It was something quieter, more calculating. Hate. It didn't explode. It formed. And the terrifying part? It felt like relief. That night, Lena sat by the window watching the city lights flicker. The world moved without her, like it always did. Somewhere between the hum of traffic and the glow of apartment windows, she caught herself thinking, they never cared. So why should I? It was a small betrayal of who she'd been. But once she thought it, she couldn't unthink it. At work the next day, she noticed things she hadn't before. The way her coworkers smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. The way praise always came with a hidden hook. How people seemed drawn to weakness. They liked you better when you were smaller than them. She'd spent her whole life being agreeable. Now she saw the world didn't reward kindness, it used it. When her colleague Emma took credit for her idea in the meeting, something inside Lena didn't shatter, it shifted. She smiled. She nodded. She said, "That's a great point, Emma." But inside, she felt the shape of a new self, one that was learning how to play the same game. Dark psychology called it reversal of empathy. A mind that bends after too much giving. A soul that breaks quietly. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. Her guilt came first, an ache that tightened her chest. But underneath, it was that whisper again. They deserve it. She got up and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at her didn't seem angry. She seemed awake. "Why should I always be the one to care?" she murmured. Her reflection didn't answer, but something in her expression did. A flicker. Like a match being lit behind the eyes. She thought of every moment she'd been talked over. Every time someone laughed at her politeness. Every person who'd mistaken her gentleness for weakness. For the first time in her life, Lena felt powerful. And for the first time, she also felt wrong. The next morning, she ignored her boss's follow-up message. She ignored Emma's smile. She walked slower, spoke softer, but something in her presence had changed. People noticed it, the silence that followed when she entered a room, the chill that came with her smile. Inside, she was studying them now, not pleasing them. She wanted to see what guilt looked like in their eyes. But she found none, and that made her hate them more. Still, late at night, guilt crept back in. It always did. She would replay every small act of rebellion, ignoring a message, lying about progress, smiling when someone failed, and she'd feel the warmth of satisfaction mix with nausea. She started to journal again, but the words were different now. Not confessions, observations, patterns of human behavior. She wrote, "People mistake empathy for morality. It's just emotional control. And when you lose that control, you finally see how fragile goodness really is." She reread the line and shivered. For a long time, she had believed her kindness made her safe. But now she understood, only made her visible to those who wanted to take. That night, as the clock ticked past 2, Lena whispered a quiet promise to herself. Never again. And for the first time in years, she fell asleep without guilt. But dreams have a way of remembering what the conscious mind forgets. When she woke up, her pillow was damp, her hands were trembling, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw blood on her fingertips. It wasn't real. But the image stayed. Something in her had crossed a line. And deep down, she knew she wouldn't step back. Lena had learned something dangerous. Silence could hurt more than words. At first, it was just an experiment, ignoring texts, letting people wonder. Then it became instinct. The less she spoke, the more they reached for her. Guilt, she noticed, had a strange way of reversing itself. When she withdrew her kindness, others began to feel what she once did: uncertainty, self-blame, confusion. And she watched. Each apology she received fed the quiet storm inside her. She told herself she didn't mean to manipulate anyone, that she was simply protecting herself. But deep down, she knew what she was doing. And the knowledge burned, even as it thrilled her. Days blurred. Her apartment felt heavier now, air thick with unsaid words, walls pressing closer. Every surface reflected pieces of her life. Sticky notes, unfinished sketches, cups left half full. She'd always been someone who needed order. Now she found comfort in decay. Her therapist once said guilt was the mind's way of remembering who you are. But Lena didn't want to remember. She wanted to forget the version of herself who cried when others raised their voices, who apologized for existing. At work, she moved differently, measured, detached. People stopped asking for help. She could feel their discomfort around her, and sometimes, when their eyes darted away, she almost smiled. But the silence followed her home. It echoed in the refrigerator hum, in the tick of the clock, in the absence of messages she'd once waited for. There was peace in it, but not freedom. One evening, while scrolling through old photos, she paused on an image of herself from last year, smiling, sunlit, arms around friends she no longer spoke to. Her eyes then were open, soft, unaware. She felt something twist inside her chest. It wasn't nostalgia. It was contempt. How naive she looked, believing the world rewarded sincerity. She almost pitied that girl. Then, beneath the contempt, came the guilt. It rose slow and steady, like water filling a room. Her throat tightened. The photo blurred. That night she deleted it. Not just the picture, all of them. Every trace of her old self vanished in seconds. But the guilt didn't fade. It grew louder. By the third week, Lena started noticing small things. Her reflection blinking slower than her thoughts. Her body moving before she decided to. When she caught herself staring at people too long, she'd look away quickly, afraid they'd see what was forming behind her eyes. The mind, she'd once read, protects itself by numbing emotion. But what happens when numbness becomes your only feeling? She began writing again, but this time her notes were darker. Guilt doesn't come from what you've done. It comes from who you think you still are. Once kindness becomes currency, every act of love feels like a transaction. The more she wrote, the clearer her thoughts became. It was as if guilt wasn't punishing her. It was guiding her. Her old life, her old values, even her old empathy. They'd all been illusions. The world wasn't kind or fair. It was a quiet battlefield of control. And those who refused to fight were simply chosen as prey. Still, there were moments when her heart rebelled. In the elevator, she caught a glimpse of her reflection, tired, pale, eyes hollow with sleeplessness, and for a moment she whispered, "I don't want to hate anymore." But the silence that answered her was worse than judgment. It was acceptance. Then came the meeting. Her boss, Mr. Carroll, called her in to re-evaluate her performance. He spoke softly, avoiding her eyes, his words laced with corporate pity. "You used to be so collaborative, Lena. People feel you've grown distant." She felt the heat rise in her chest, but her voice stayed calm. Maybe I just stopped mistaking compliance for teamwork. He blinked, thrown off. That's not what she smiled. Of course not. And then silence again waited, deliberate. For the first time, she saw fear flicker in his eyes. Not much, just enough. And something inside her relaxed. That night, Lena walked home through light rain, the city glowing orange under street lamps. The sound of cars, the wet pavement, the faint chill, all of it felt strangely intimate. She thought of her old self, the one who needed permission to feel angry. That woman was gone now, but what replaced her wasn't freedom, it was emptiness. Guilt had hollowed her out, and hate had moved in. When she reached her building, she stood outside for a long time, staring at her reflection in the dark glass door. The rain distorted her features, but she recognized the look in her eyes, control, and control felt addictive. Later that night, she wrote one last note in her journal. Hate is not the opposite of love. It's the moment you realize love no longer protects you. She closed the book and placed it on her nightstand. Her room was quiet, almost sacred. Yet somewhere beneath that silence, she could feel her conscience struggling to breathe. The next morning, she didn't check her phone. She didn't check her reflection either. She just stood in the doorway, her hand trembling slightly on the frame, wondering how much guilt a person could carry before it turned into something irreversible. And deep down, she feared she was about to find out. Asterisk. There's a moment when guilt stops hurting. Not because you've healed, because you've gone numb. Lena didn't know exactly when that happened. Maybe it was the morning she forgot to feel ashamed. Maybe it was the afternoon she caught herself smiling at someone else's pain. Either way, the silence inside her wasn't heavy anymore. It was hollow, echoing. A space she could fill with anything she wanted. At work, they'd stopped talking about her. Fear had replaced gossip. The woman who once said yes to everything now answered only when she chose to. When her boss asked for progress reports, she'd hand him numbers, just enough to keep him uncertain. Control, she'd learned, was subtle. It wasn't about shouting louder. It was about making people question themselves. Still, guilt lingered like static. Every time she passed Emma in the hallway, the woman who'd once taken credit for her work, Lena felt it stir. But not for what she'd done, for what she was about to. That afternoon, she stayed late in the office. The city outside was fading into blue shadows. Emma's voice carried faintly from the conference room, rehearsing a presentation that Lena had quietly sabotaged hours earlier. She hadn't meant to. At least, that's what she told herself. It started with one small edit, then another, until the data no longer made sense. When the door finally opened and Emma stepped out, her face pale, her eyes confused, Lena looked up from her desk and smiled. A kind, sympathetic smile. Rough night? She asked softly. Emma nodded, trembling slightly. The file's corrupted. I don't know how. Lena tilted her head. That's strange. You're usually so careful. She didn't wait for a response. She gathered her things, walked out, and left the sound of Emma's panicked breathing behind her. In the elevator, Lena felt nothing. No thrill, no satisfaction. Just quiet. But somewhere deep down, something broke. That night, she dreamed of her old self again. The version who used to say sorry just to keep peace. The version who smiled even when she was drowning. In the dream, that version stood in front of her, holding out a hand. Lena reached for it, hesitated, and then watched it fade. When she woke, her chest hurt. Not from fear, but from the realization that she didn't want to go back. She sat up, staring at the faint outline of dawn leaking through the curtains. The air felt different, now colder, cleaner. She walked to the mirror and studied the woman reflected there. Her eyes were calm. Too calm. Guilt still lived there, but it no longer begged for forgiveness. It waited for understanding. And slowly, Lena realized the truth. She didn't hate others. She hated herself for letting them teach her how to dot by noon. The office was buzzing with whispers. Emma had been reprimanded for data errors. Mr. Carroll was asking questions. No one suspected Lena. Why would they? She was still the polite one, the quiet one, the dependable one. That was the irony of evil. It wore the face people trusted most. Thought Lena spent the day pretending to work, her thoughts circling like vultures. The guilt was still there, but different now, less moral, more analytical. She found herself writing again. The words slow and deliberate. When guilt becomes familiar, it stops asking for forgiveness. It starts asking for purpose. The pen trembled slightly in her hand. Purpose. That was what she'd been chasing all along, some reason behind the hate, some meaning in the fracture. But there was none. There never had been. The realization hit her quietly, like cold rain. She wasn't avenging her kindness or punishing cruelty. She was just tired of feeling too much. That evening, Lena walked home under a bruised sky. The streets shimmered from recent rain, neon signs bleeding color into puddles. She felt weightless, detached, like watching someone else move her body. Passing a cafe, she caught a glimpse of herself in the window, expressionless, composed, almost serene. And for the first time, she pitied the people still trying to be good. Goodness was exhausting. It asked you to care, even when it hurt. And once you stopped, there was no going back. At home, she lit a candle. The flame flickered weakly, struggling against the draft. She placed her journal beside it and opened to the last page. She wrote, "I thought guilt was the proof of goodness. But maybe it's just the shadow of it." Her hand hesitated before she added one final line. "Every act of hate begins as self-defense." She stared at the sentence until the letters blurred. Then she closed the book, pressed her palm against the cover, and exhaled. The silence around her no longer felt suffocating. It felt earned. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed, fading into the night. Somewhere inside, her heart slowed steady, deliberate, almost peaceful. And though she knew what she'd done could never be undone, she also knew something else. Something colder, but honest. She had finally become the kind of person no one could hurt again. Lena leaned back in her chair, watching the candle burn lower, the wax pooling like blood around the wick. There was no redemption here. No forgiveness waiting at the end. Only understanding. That was enough.